The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby forest and the faint tang of gunpowder lingering from yesterday's practice. A low, golden sun stretched long shadows across the dry, dusty terrain of the military firing range. The ground was rough, uneven, and dotted with worn paths where countless boots had passed over the years, leaving the imprint of dedication and discipline. Rows of targets, painted with black circles over white backgrounds, stood in the distance. Like silent judges, each one waiting to test the skill of those who dared step forward. The Marines assembled in formation, their boots crunching against gravel, rifles slung over shoulders, and faces taut with anticipation. There was a tangible tension, a mixture of excitement and anxiety that lingered in the cool morning air. The instructor, a grizzled veteran with silver streaks in his short-cropped hair, paced before them, exuding an aura of authority and unspoken expectations. He barked commands sharply, but beneath his stern exterior, a note of concern crept in. This group had a history of faltering at the range, and he could already sense that today would be no different, unless something or someone changed the pattern. Amid the line of Marines, a young woman stood slightly apart, her posture relaxed but precise. Her uniform was immaculate, but unlike some of the recruits around her, it was no unnecessary swagger, no overzealous display of confidence. She carried herself with quiet poise, a calm that contrasted sharply with the jittery energy surrounding her. While others adjusted their helmets, fidgeted with rifle straps, or exchanged nervous glances, she simply surveyed the range, her eyes sharp and attentive. There was something almost magnetic about her calm, drawing the attention of a few curious Marines, though most dismissed her as merely quiet. The instructor paused mid-step, squinting in her direction. "You," he barked. "Stay alert, watch and learn." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity and slight apprehension. He had seen recruits who underestimated the environment, the rifles, or themselves, and he knew that confidence without skill could be disastrous. Yet there was an instinct, subtle and difficult to define, that suggested this young woman might be different. The day began with the routine checks. Rifles were inspected, ammunition counted, and safety protocols recited. The Marines lined up. At their stations, the weight of the rifles pressing against their shoulders. Their breaths came fast and shallow as the first shots rang out across the range. Each crack echoed sharply, bouncing off the hills surrounding the practice field. But almost immediately, a pattern emerged. One by one, the bullets missed the bullseye. Some grazed the edges, others fell wide, and a few didn't even hit the target at all. Frustration quickly replaced the initial excitement. "Again, pay attention," the instructor shouted, his voice carrying over the clamor of rifles. Yet, despite repeated attempts, the misses continued. The Marines grew tense. Their knuckles whitened on rifle grips, elbows shook, and hands trembled just enough to throw off aim. Some cursed under their breath, others muttered excuses, blaming equipment or wind, though the day was calm and still. Sweat began to bead on foreheads, and a quiet panic settled in. Even seasoned recruits struggled to maintain composure, their movements jerky and imprecise. The young woman observed silently from her position at the edge of the formation. She noticed the subtle errors each Marine made, the way their shoulders tensed, the uneven distribution of weight on their feet, the nervous flutter of a finger on the trigger. Her own hands remained relaxed, her breathing deep and steady. She had grown up in a rural area where hunting was not merely a pastime but a way of life. She knew how to read a rifle, understand its weight, feel its recoil, and anticipate the flight of a bullet. Yet she had never been in a formal military range before. Here, she saw the difference between learned skill and raw instinct. As the instructor walked down the line, offering sharp corrections, she noticed the subtle interplay of pressure and performance. One Marine leaned too far forward, anticipating the shot and jerking the rifle as he squeezed the trigger. Another gripped the stock too tightly, his knuckles white, causing the recoil to push the shot off-center. The young woman made mental notes, analyzing not just the mechanics of the rifles, but the psychology of the shooters. Fear, impatience, and overthinking were sabotaging their skill. She understood that control was as much mental as it was physical. She adjusted her posture slightly, just enough to relieve tension in her back, and watched as the instructor's frustration grew. He ran a hand across his weathered face and muttered under his breath, a habit he had whenever a session began to spiral out of control. "Why can't they see it?" he asked rhetorically. Around him, the Marines exchanged glances, silently acknowledging their own inadequacy. It was a humbling moment, yet one that would soon set the stage for something remarkable. By mid-morning, the tension at the range had become almost unbearable. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the targets and making shadows shrink beneath the recruits' feet. Still, shots continued to miss. The instructor's voice grew louder, sharper, almost desperate. His eyes scanned the line, seeking a solution, any solution. That's when the young woman stepped slightly forward, catching his attention. Not boldly, not demanding, but quietly calm and composed. She made her way toward one of the rifles that had been returned to the rack, her eyes never leaving the targets. A ripple of whispers traveled through the line of Marines. "Who does she think she is?" muttered one recruit. "She's not even in the middle of the pack," said another. Skepticism colored every glance cast in her direction. Yet there was an unspoken curiosity, a subtle tension of anticipation. Even the instructor paused, his sharp eyes narrowing in interest. Something in her composure suggested that she was not here to fail. Unlike the Marines around her, she was not reacting to pressure, she was embracing it. The young woman gently lifted the rifle, inspecting its mechanisms with careful hands. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, while the others had been anxious, hurried, and sometimes careless. She was measured, observing each detail. Her stance shifted slightly, balancing weight evenly on both feet, shoulders relaxed, elbows in perfect alignment. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled slowly, and exhaled, centering herself. Every noise of the range, the distant rustle of leaves, the echo of bullets faded into the background. For a moment, there was only her, the rifle, and the target ahead. As she positioned herself at the firing line, the instructor stepped closer. "You think you can handle that?" he asked, a mix of curiosity and challenge in his voice. She nodded silently. The Marines watched, some in disbelief, others in cautious admiration. Nobody could have predicted what was about to happen, but for the first time that morning, there was a sense of possibility. A quiet promise lingered in the air. Perhaps today, someone would break the streak of missed shots. The stage was set. The targets waited, the rifles were ready, and the young woman stood poised. The morning, once tense and filled with frustration, now held a new energy, anticipation, curiosity, and the faint thrill of the unexpected. Something was about to shift at the range, and no one present could have guessed how profound the change would be. In that moment, she was ready, and the story of the perfect shot was quietly beginning. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the firing range, baking the dirt under the Marines' boots. The air was still, almost oppressively so, except for the occasional sharp crack of rifle fire echoing across the hills. The recruits had begun their second round of practice, yet the pattern remained the same. Shots were scattered, marks barely scratching the targets. Frustration had replaced the earlier nervous anticipation, and an invisible weight pressed on every Marine. Even the strongest and most experienced among them was faltering, their confidence eroding with each miss. The instructor's face tightened as he observed the chaos. His voice, once commanding, now carried frustration. "Focus. Breathe. Eyes on the target. He shouted, but the words barely seemed to penetrate the fog of tension, clouding the line of Marines. He moved swiftly along the row, stopping occasionally to correct stance or grip, but the errors were stubbornly persistent. A recruit leaned too far forward, overcompensating for recoil. Another shifted his weight unevenly, sending the shot wide. Some gritted their teeth, their muscles taut with stress, while others exhaled sharply, only to jerk the rifle at the moment of firing. The young woman, still at the edge of the formation, remained a silent observer. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the nervous energy of the others. She noticed patterns, small mistakes repeated over and over. Finger placement, uneven shoulders, improper stance, and most importantly, the influence of panic. The rifles themselves were not at fault. They were reliable, finely tuned instruments. The problem was in the shooters. She could sense the tension radiating from each Marine, a subtle tremor that disrupted the flow of motion necessary for precision. She crouched slightly, her eyes tracing the trajectory of bullets, noting the points where the Marine's aim faltered. Each misfire told a story of rushed movements, overthinking, or lack of practice under pressure. Some recruits had a tendency to anticipate the recoil, pressing down too early and throwing the shot off center. Others gripped the rifle as if it were a weapon of war rather than a tool for focus and precision, and the excess tension translated directly into missed marks. Every observation was a clue, a lesson she was storing mentally, preparing for the moment when she would finally take her turn. Around her, the Marines were growing restless. Whispers passed along the line, voices tinged with frustration and embarrassment. "How are we still missing?" muttered one recruit, his face pale under the sun. Another cursed under his breath, adjusting his stance for what he hoped would be a better shot. The instructor's patience was thinning. He could feel the day slipping away without a single perfect hit. Normally, by mid-morning, at least a few Marines would have demonstrated consistent accuracy. But today, chaos dominated the range. The instructor sighed heavily and paused, running a hand across his weathered face. "This is basic marksmanship," he barked, trying to reassert authority. "You've trained for months for this. Focus, Marines, focus." Yet the words fell flat, echoing into the heat-thickened air. The recruits were trapped in a feedback loop of stress and failure. Each missed shot compounded their nerves, and every adjustment seemed to make matters worse. Their confidence, once steady, was now eroding rapidly, leaving doubt in its place. Meanwhile, the young woman continued to study silently. Her breathing was slow and steady, her hands relaxed at her sides, yet her mind was fully engaged. She analyzed each Marine's stance, the subtle lean of a shoulder, the way elbows shifted under stress, the angle of the wrist as they pressed the trigger. She saw how minor deviations created cascading errors, how tension magnified the tiniest mistakes. Her observations were precise, methodical, and free of the panic that crippled the others. In her mind, she reconstructed the ideal shot, each movement aligned with proper technique and calm focus. One recruit, desperate to redeem himself, adjusted his grip and aimed again. The rifle fired, the bullet whistling through the air and missed by a wide margin. He cursed loudly, throwing his hands up in frustration. Another Marine followed, fingers trembling as he tried to steady his aim, yet his shot veered off center again. The instructor's face tightened further, his jaw clenching in visible irritation. He stopped mid-step and stared at the line, feeling the tension radiate outward, a combination of skill deficit and human pressure that had taken hold of his recruits. The young woman made a subtle adjustment in her stance, shifting her weight slightly. She did not pick up a rifle, yet her body moved as if practicing the rhythm of the shot. She was learning, not from textbooks or instructors, but from observing real-time errors in live practice. She understood that marksmanship was not about strength or speed, It was about focus, timing, and control. The Marines around her were trapped in physical reactions, whereas she had already begun the mental calculations necessary for precision. Hours seemed to stretch on the range, the sun climbing higher, burning away the cool of morning. Sweat trickled down brows and stung eyes. The instructor had begun to bark orders with sharper urgency, attempting to restore order and discipline. "Steady, don't rush," he shouted, but the Marines were caught in a spiral of mistakes and frustration. One after another, shots missed, leaving the targets dotted with imperfect holes. Every failure intensified the pressure, yet the young woman remained unmoved, a silent observer in the middle of chaos. Her observations continued, and she began to mentally simulate each Marine's movement. She noted the subtle jerks of fingers, the leaning of bodies, and the tension in shoulders. Slowly, she pieced together an invisible map of errors and corrections. Her mind, trained by years of experience outside the military, anticipated each shot's flight path before it even left the barrel. Unlike the Marines, she was not caught in the trap of emotion. Her calculations were precise, her focus absolute. Finally, one Marine, exasperated, threw his rifle to the ground and muttered, "I can't do this." Another groaned, wiping sweat from his brow, while the instructor's face grew red with frustration. The range, once filled with disciplined energy, now echoed with tension, whispers, and the occasional sound of failure. Yet amid the chaos, the young woman's calm stood in stark contrast. Her eyes never left the target, her posture perfect, her mind sharp. She knew the pattern of mistakes, the path to correction, and the precise moments she would step in. As the session drew toward its midpoint, the instructor paused, surveying the line. He muttered under his breath, "We're going to need something, or someone, to change this." He didn't know it yet, but that someone was already standing quietly at the edge of the range, waiting, observing, and preparing to take action. The young woman's moment had not yet arrived, but the foundation for what would become a legendary display of skill was being quietly set. The tension was thick, the frustration real, and the pressure on the Marines unbearable. Missed shots, sweat, and nerves combined to create a perfect storm of human error. And yet, in the midst of failure, a silent observer stood ready, her patience unbroken, her mind perfectly tuned, her confidence unwavering. The morning had become a test not only of skill, but of perseverance, focus, and the quiet power of observation. The day was far from over, and the story of triumph was about to begin. The Marines continued to fire, their rifles cracking sharply in the heat of the late morning sun. Each shot carried tension, frustration, and a growing sense of defeat. Targets, once pristine, were now pockmarked with imperfect holes, none close to the bullseye. The instructor's patience had nearly worn thin. His hands trembled slightly as he ran them over his weathered face, muttering instructions under his breath. "Focus, adjust your stance. Don't rush." Yet the voices fell flat against the chaotic chorus of panic, overthinking, and fatigue. Mistakes seemed to compound exponentially, each one feeding into the next. From the edge of the line, a young woman observed silently. She had been standing there for nearly an hour, absorbing every detail of the Marine's movements, every twitch of a shoulder, every trembling finger. Her calm composure seemed almost unnatural against the chaos surrounding her. While others fumed or cursed, she simply watched. The instructor had begun to notice her presence. His curiosity piqued. He knew that most recruits were either struggling visibly or trying too hard to hide their nervousness. Yet she exhibited none of these telltale signs. Her background had prepared her in ways the military had not. Growing up in a rural area, she had spent countless mornings tracking, aiming, and shooting. Hunting had taught her patience, focus, and control over her body. Every action from the grip of a rifle to the breath drawn before a shot, had to be precise. She understood rhythm, balance, and timing in ways the recruits around her, despite months of formal training, had yet to grasp. Her experience was practical, instinctual, and honed in real-world conditions. It had given her an edge that no amount of military drilling could replicate. As she watched, she began to take mental notes. One Marine had a slight bend in his wrist that caused the bullet to veer right. Another leaned too far forward, anticipating recoil, resulting in repeated low shots. Some pressed the trigger too quickly, others hesitated, both extremes sabotaging accuracy. She could see the way their muscles reacted under stress, how tension translated into mechanical errors. Her mind ran through a series of adjustments, imagining how each shot could be corrected if approached differently. Slowly, she pieced together the path to precision. Her calmness seemed to magnify the tension around her. The Marines, sweating and frustrated, threw nervous glances her way, wondering what allowed her to remain unaffected. Some whispered quietly, "How is she just standing there?" Others scoffed, assuming she had no real skill and was simply observing. They didn't know that her observation was active preparation. She wasn't passive. She was learning from their mistakes, internalizing the rhythm of the rifles, and mapping out the exact sequence needed for perfect accuracy. She crouched slightly, her stance deliberate, feeling the tension in her own body and releasing it methodically. She imagined the rifle in her hands, the weight, the recoil, the trajectory of the bullet. Her mind recreated the perfect shot in slow motion, step by step. Proper grip, shoulder alignment, steady breathing, focus on the bullseye, and precise trigger control. Every detail mattered. She was not rushing, not panicking, and not reacting emotionally. She was preparing for a moment that would soon arrive, a moment when patience and precision would outshine force and frustration. The instructor, sensing something, approached her cautiously. "You've been quiet all morning," he said, his tone curious, almost cautious. "Do you think you could do better?" She simply nodded, eyes still fixed on the Marines struggling at the line. She did not need to answer verbally. Her posture, her calm, and her confidence said enough. He returned to the row of Marines, muttering under his breath, but his expression had changed slightly, a hint of curiosity replacing frustration. He had seen many recruits, but very few had the kind of presence she radiated. Around her, the Marines continued to flail. One cursed, throwing up his hands after yet another missed shot. Another wiped sweat from his brow, muttering, "I don't know what's going wrong." A few others glanced nervously at the instructor, hoping for guidance. The tension was palpable, a mixture of physical exhaustion, mental fatigue, and growing embarrassment. Each failed attempt amplified the pressure on the rest. Yet the young woman remained unaffected, her observations unbroken, her mind still calculating, planning, and preparing. She noticed subtle interactions the instructor hadn't verbalized. The way he adjusted his stance, how he suggested minor corrections, and even the tone of his voice, all clues to what he considered correct technique. From this, she built a mental framework of how to approach the shot. Not only did she understand the mechanics, but she also understood the psychology of pressure under which the Marines were failing. The insight was invaluable. It allowed her to anticipate the challenges she would face when she eventually took the rifle. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the line of Marines and adding to their fatigue. Sweat streaked down faces. Rifles became heavier with each repeated attempt, and frustration boiled over. One Marine yelled out, "I'm done. This is useless." Another shook his head, muttering, "It's like the rifle's cursed." The instructor's patience was stretched to its limit. He knew the morale of the recruits could collapse completely if no breakthrough occurred soon. Yet the young woman continued to observe quietly, her presence almost like a calm eye at the center of the storm. Her strategy had already formed in her mind. She knew that a perfect shot required a series of coordinated steps, a relaxed but firm grip, even weight distribution, controlled breathing, precise sight alignment, and unwavering focus on the target. But most importantly, she understood the mental aspect: to block out the panic, ignore the failure surrounding her, and treat each shot as a singular, deliberate act. Whereas the Marines were trapped in a cycle of error and doubt, she had already separated herself mentally, positioning herself for success. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity for the exhausted Marines. Each shot they fired seemed to confirm their fears. Failure was dominant, and frustration was consuming them. Yet for the young woman, time seemed to bend differently. She was not fatigued, not distracted, and not anxious. Every movement of the Marines reinforced her understanding, giving her insight into what corrections were necessary. She visualized herself taking a rifle, raising it, and performing the perfect shot sequence, a shot that no one else had achieved that morning. Finally, as the instructor prepared to call a break, she shifted slightly forward. Her stance was perfect, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. There was a quiet determination in her eyes, a sense of readiness that the others lacked. She had absorbed the errors, analyzed the techniques, and mentally rehearsed the solution countless times over. All that remained was the moment when she would ask, "Let me try that rifle." The Marines, unaware of the storm of skill quietly brewing at the edge of the line, continued their struggle, oblivious that the turning point of the day was about to arrive. The range, once filled with chaotic energy and frustration, now carried a subtle tension of anticipation. The instructor, unaware of the young woman's readiness, prepared to call the session a temporary failure. The Marines' morale was low, the afternoon sun beating down, and yet amidst the disarray, a calm figure had quietly prepared for her moment. When she finally stepped forward, the day would change, and the legend of the perfect shot would begin. The tension on the range had reached a breaking point. Sweat dripped from brows, rifles weighed heavily on tired shoulders, and the frustrated chorus of missed shots had become a relentless backdrop. The sun climbed mercilessly overhead, painting the dust in golden light that glared off metal and helmets alike. The instructor had stopped pacing, folding his arms over his chest as he surveyed the line of exhausted Marines. Nothing had worked. The target still bore more failures than successes, and the morale of the recruits was teetering on collapse. Amid this chaos, the young woman remained calm. Her posture was straight, her breathing slow and deliberate, and her eyes never left the row of targets. Every miss, every frustrated adjustment, every tense movement of her fellow Marines had been carefully observed. She knew what had gone wrong for each of them. She had traced the subtle shifts in posture, the overcompensation of movements, and the jerky finger motions that threw their aim off. Mentally, she had rehearsed each correction, visualizing herself performing the perfect shot sequence multiple times. Finally, she stepped slightly forward, breaking the rhythm of noise and frustration that filled the range. A ripple of whispers ran through the line of Marines. "Wait, is she really going to? She's just some quiet girl. She can't be serious," muttered one recruit, disbelief in his tone. The others exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to pay attention or continue their own attempts. Their failure-filled morning had left them weary, and the unexpected action of the young woman injected a jolt of curiosity, tension, and for some, skepticism. The instructor turned sharply, raising an eyebrow as he noticed her movement. "You," he barked, his voice still carrying authority. "What do you want?" There was a note of curiosity, tinged with caution, in his tone. Most recruits would not have dared to step forward at this point in the morning, not after watching repeated failures. But she didn't flinch. She didn't falter. Calmly, she responded in a clear, steady voice, "Sir, may I try that rifle?" A stunned silence fell across the range. The Marines froze mid-motion, rifles suspended in the air, eyes darting between her and the instructor. Some whispered quietly, "She's serious?" Others smirked, expecting some inevitable failure. Their confidence or lack thereof was evident in every gaze. The instructor paused, evaluating her carefully. There was something different in her demeanor, something he couldn't quite place. Her calm confidence was not arrogance, yet it suggested a level of readiness that most of the recruits lacked entirely. "All right," he said cautiously, motioning to the rifle rack. "Take it, but don't expect miracles. This is your first time on the line." The words were meant as caution, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He had seen countless recruits fail under pressure, but there was an aura around her that hinted at potential. Slowly, she walked to the rack, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Every step was measured, her posture perfect, her focus unwavering. The Marines watched in silent awe, still unsure whether this would be another disaster. She lifted the rifle carefully, inspecting it with meticulous attention. Fingers traced the stock, the barrel, the trigger, and the sights. She adjusted the sights slightly, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon settle in her hands. Unlike the Marines, who had become tense and overanxious, she exuded calm and precision. Her eyes scanned the targets in front of her, analyzing distances, lighting, and angles. Every detail mattered. This was not a casual attempt. It was the culmination of careful observation, preparation, and mental rehearsal. The instructor stepped back slightly, his interest now fully piqued. "Take your time," he instructed, almost unconsciously mirroring the calm she radiated. He knew that rushing her could ruin the process, but patience, he realized, might allow something extraordinary to happen. The Marines, still skeptical, whispered among themselves. Some were dismissive, while others couldn't help stealing glances, wondering what she might do. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of anticipation, doubt, and curiosity. She positioned herself at the line, planting her feet firmly, distributing her weight evenly. Shoulders were relaxed, elbows aligned perfectly, and her grip was firm but not tight. Slowly, she exhaled, centering her focus entirely on the target before her. The world seemed to narrow into a tunnel. The rifle in her hands, the sights aligned, the bullseye in sharp focus. Everything else, the sun beating down, the murmurs of the Marines, the crackle of spent bullets faded into insignificance. For a brief moment, it was only her and the shot she was about to take. Her first pull of the trigger was deliberate. The rifle fired with a sharp crack, and the bullet struck much closer to the center than any previous attempt that morning. A hush fell across the range. Even the instructor, hardened by years of training and command, could not hide his surprise. The Marines looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and sudden recognition. She was different. Unlike them, who had rushed and panicked, she had approached the task with patience, calculation, and calm determination. Encouraged by the success of the first shot, she took another, maintaining perfect focus. The second bullet hit even closer to the center. Her rhythm was methodical, precise, and unhurried. Each pull of the trigger was measured, every movement calculated. The young woman's skill was not flashy or aggressive. It was the quiet, controlled application of learned technique, mental focus, and deliberate practice. She demonstrated a mastery that left the Marines awestruck, their frustration now mingled with wonder. The instructor watched, eyebrows raised, heart pounding slightly with anticipation. He had trained hundreds of recruits, but he had never seen anyone, especially not a quiet newcomer, handle the rifle with such composure and precision. He felt the shift in energy across the range, the air thick with disbelief, tension, and admiration. The young woman's presence had already altered the dynamic. No longer was the session a display of failure. It was becoming a demonstration of possibility, of focus overcoming chaos. The Marines, though initially skeptical, now leaned slightly forward, unable to look away. Their whispering had stopped, replaced by silent observation. The narrative of the morning, the story of repeated missed shots, frustration, and failure, was beginning to unravel. All attention was on the young woman, who stood poised, her focus absolute, her determination unwavering. Every movement was calculated, every decision precise. She had taken the chaos around her and converted it into clarity, a lesson in focus that no one could ignore. Minutes passed, each shot striking closer to perfection. The energy on the range shifted completely. What had been a scene of tension and repeated failure had transformed into one of anticipation and awe. The young woman's request to try the rifle had not only broken the cycle of mistakes, but also demonstrated a fundamental truth: patience, observation, and quiet confidence often triumph over panic, force, and desperation. She had not yet finished, but she had already rewritten the narrative of the morning. As she prepared for her next shot, the instructor realized that he had underestimated her. His experience and authority had not predicted this calm precision, and the Marines, previously frustrated and demoralized, began to absorb the lesson quietly, watching how a single individual could turn a failing session into a demonstration of skill and focus. The stage was set for what would soon become legendary, the moment when she would achieve the perfect 100. The young woman stood at the line, rifle steady in her hands, her eyes locked on the bullseye ahead. A tense silence fell across the firing range, broken only by the distant crack of spent bullets from other Marines still struggling with their aim. Sweat glistened on their brows, but the young woman's calm radiance contrasted sharply with the frantic energy around her. Every Marine held his breath, some skeptically, others with grudging admiration, while the instructor observed with barely concealed anticipation. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, even if they did not realize it. She inhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling in measured rhythm. Every muscle in her body was relaxed but engaged. Her fingers rested lightly on the trigger, elbows steady, shoulders aligned. She had spent the morning studying every misstep of the Marines, memorizing the errors, and mentally rehearsing the perfect execution. It was not simply about hitting a target. It was about precision, control, and calm under pressure. Unlike the recruits around her, she did not allow anxiety to influence her performance. Her mind was clear, her focus singular, her vision locked on the target. The first shot cracked sharply, echoing across the range. Every Marine turned instinctively, watching the bullet's trajectory. For the first time that morning, a shot landed close to the bullseye. A collective gasp swept through the line. The instructor's brow lifted in surprise, his eyes narrowing as he tried to comprehend the accuracy. The Marines exchanged bewildered glances, some whispering, "Did she just?" while others shook their heads in disbelief. No one had expected this, least of all from someone who had been so quiet and unassuming. She did not flinch at the reaction. Her breathing remained steady, her stance unchanged, her eyes still locked on the target. Another bullet cracked through the air, striking even closer to the center. The tension on the range shifted subtly. Where there had been frustration and failure, now there was curiosity, amazement, and growing anticipation. The instructor's lips pressed into a thin line as he watched, his years of experience unable to predict what was unfolding. He had trained countless Marines, yet none had displayed this combination of skill and calm. The whispers among the recruits grew louder, a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. "She's amazing," one muttered under his breath. Another, less willing to admit admiration, said, "I can't believe it. She's actually doing it." The energy on the range had changed completely. No longer was the focus on failed attempts. Every eye was now on the young woman, whose precision and patience had captured the attention of every Marine and instructor alike. She had become the center of an unfolding story, one they would remember for years. She adjusted her stance slightly, a minor shift to perfect her alignment, and pulled the trigger again. The bullet struck dead center. A hush fell for a fraction of a second before it was replaced by audible gasps, followed by murmurs of astonishment. The instructor's jaw tightened, a mixture of admiration and disbelief crossing his face. The Marines were speechless. Their earlier frustration was replaced by awe, tinged with envy. None had expected such flawless execution, and all realized they were witnessing something exceptional. Her shots were not simply accurate, they were deliberate, controlled, and rhythmic. Each bullet reinforced her mastery of the rifle, her focus, and her composure. Unlike the Marines before her, who had been panicked and rushed, she was methodical. There was a grace to her movements, a clarity of thought that translated into precision. The instructor recognized it immediately. This was not luck or coincidence. This was skill honed through experience, patience, and careful observation. The young woman continued firing, one bullet after another, each landing closer to perfection. Her movements were fluid yet deliberate, her breathing synchronized with each shot. The Marines, watching in disbelief, began to feel the contrast between their own tense, rushed actions and the calm mastery she displayed. Some began to shift uncomfortably, their earlier confidence eroded by the undeniable demonstration of her skill. For the first time that morning, the range was filled not with frustration, but with awe. The instructor stepped closer, his hands on his hips, observing every micro-movement. His eyes followed the alignment of her shoulders, the positioning of her elbows, and the relaxation of her grip. He understood, in that moment, that her performance was teaching the Marines more than any lecture or repeated attempt ever could. Focus, patience, and control were far more critical than brute strength or rushed action. The lesson was silent, yet powerful, leaving everyone at the range profoundly aware of what it meant to execute skill under pressure. The Marines exchanged glances, some nodding slowly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "I've never seen anyone shoot like that," one muttered quietly. Another whispered, "She makes it look so easy." They were witnessing the embodiment of training meeting instinct and observation, a combination that none of them had yet mastered. The young woman had become both teacher and example, showing how preparation, calm focus, and methodical execution could achieve what had seemed impossible. With each successive shot, she approached perfection. Her rhythm remained steady, her focus unwavering. The air around the range seemed charged with anticipation, almost reverent in tone. The instructor could feel it too, a sense that this moment, this demonstration, was unique, something that would be remembered long after the rifles were put away. The Marines had become silent spectators, their earlier attempts overshadowed by the unfolding mastery before them. Then came the shot that would cement her status in their memory. She exhaled slowly, aligned her sights perfectly, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dead center the bullseye. A perfect hit. The instructor's eyes widened in astonishment, and for a brief moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly, the realization spread among the Marines. They erupted in a mixture of cheers, gasps, and whispered admiration. What they had deemed impossible had just been achieved. She had not only succeeded where they had failed, but had done so with grace, patience, and quiet authority. The young woman lowered the rifle, her face calm, her expression unaltered by the applause and astonishment surrounding her. She had done what needed to be done, demonstrating the power of focus, preparation, and composure. The instructor approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Outstanding," he said simply, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and disbelief. The Marines, now reflective, realized the lesson of the morning. Patience, careful observation, and mastery of fundamentals, often outweigh raw effort and rushed attempts. As she stepped back from the firing line, the energy of the range had transformed completely. Frustration and tension had been replaced by respect, admiration, and renewed focus. The young woman had not only demonstrated skill, but had reshaped the mindset of every Marine present. Her first shots, precise and deliberate, had broken the cycle of failure, teaching a lesson far greater than any instructor could articulate. The perfect execution of each round was now a benchmark, a silent example that would guide them in future training. The young woman's next shots rang out with unwavering precision. Each bullet struck closer to the center of the target than the last, as if guided by a steady hand and a mind entirely attuned to the mechanics of the rifle. The air on the range seemed to shift. A quiet reverence replaced the earlier chaos. The Marines, who had been tense, frustrated, and hopeless moments ago, now leaned forward in stunned disbelief. Even those who had mocked her quiet demeanor were silent, their eyes glued to the unfolding display of skill. The instructor, a veteran who had seen countless recruits train and fail, was frozen in astonishment. His brow arched, his jaw tight with admiration, and yet he could barely conceal his disbelief. He had trained some of the finest marksmen in the corps, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. Here, in the midst of a morning of repeated failures, a young woman had demonstrated composure, focus, and skill that transcended expectations. His years of experience told him this was extraordinary, a performance that would become legend. The Marines whispered among themselves, disbelief written across every face. "No way. She's perfect," muttered one, voice low and almost reverent. Another shook his head, muttering, "I've never seen anyone shoot like that." Their frustration from earlier attempts was replaced by awe, tinged with envy. They had struggled for hours, trying to force accuracy, only to fail. Yet here she was, calm and composed, turning each shot into a testament of patience, precision, and mental clarity. The young woman did not rush. Each shot was deliberate, every movement controlled. Her breathing remained slow and steady, perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of the rifle. Every detail mattered: the alignment of her shoulders, the placement of her elbows, the pressure of her finger on the trigger. In her mind, each shot was rehearsed, calculated, and executed with unwavering precision. What had been chaos for the Marines was clarity for her, a dance of mechanics, patience, and focus, culminating in perfect execution. Then came the final shot. The young woman inhaled deeply, aligning the sights, centering the bullseye in perfect focus. Her finger pressed the trigger, and the rifle cracked sharply. The bullet struck the target exactly in the center, the perfect 100. A stunned silence followed for a heartbeat, as if the range itself was holding its breath. Then, the reality of what had happened sank in. The Marines, who had been hopeless moments ago, erupted in exclamations of amazement and applause. The instructor's eyes widened, and for the first time that morning, he smiled genuinely, a mixture of pride and astonishment on his face. Every Marine on the line felt the weight of what they had just witnessed. Their own failures, their frustration, and their exhaustion were dwarfed by her achievement. Some stared silently, processing the demonstration of skill that defied expectation. Others spoke in hushed tones, acknowledging aloud the lesson she had imparted without a single word. Patience, composure, and focus could accomplish what brute force and desperation could not. It was a living example of mastery under pressure. The instructor approached her, stepping carefully, as if not to disturb the rare concentration she had demonstrated. "Outstanding," he said, voice filled with awe. "Absolutely perfect." He paused, taking in the calm confidence she exuded. "I've seen some of the best marksmen in the course, but I've never seen anyone, especially someone so composed, execute a perfect 100 like that. Incredible." The Marines looked on, some still shaking their heads in disbelief, others beginning to understand the depth of what they had just witnessed. She lowered the rifle, her expression serene, unaffected by the attention she had garnered. It was not pride that radiated from her, but quiet confidence and composure. For her, this was simply the result of careful observation, preparation, and mental discipline. Every Marine present recognized that this was not a fluke. It was skill refined through patience, focus, and practice. They had spent the morning floundering, yet she had demonstrated what true control and understanding could achieve. The energy on the range had transformed completely. Where there had been chaos, frustration, and tension, there was now admiration, reflection, and renewed determination. The young woman's demonstration became a silent lesson to every Marine. Success was not merely about strength or speed, but about discipline, focus, and calm under pressure. Her perfect 100 was a revelation of visual, undeniable statement that mastery required mental control as much as physical technique. Whispers among the Marines continued, some tinged with envy, some with respect. "I need to study her technique," muttered one quietly. Another said, "I was so focused on speed, I forgot about focus." Each Marine internalized the lesson differently, but all recognized the impact of what they had just witnessed. Her performance had transcended the routine of a firing range. It had become a defining moment, a story they would carry with them long after leaving the training ground. The instructor, still absorbing the magnitude of the event, addressed the group. "Take note," he said firmly. "What you just saw is what skill, focus, and preparation can achieve. This isn't about luck. This isn't about raw strength. It's about composure, patience, and precision. Let this guide you in your own training. Learn from her example." His words carried weight because every Marine understood that he was speaking from experience, and now from astonishment. The young woman's calm gaze swept across the line of Marines. She offered small tips, concise and practical, about stance, breathing, and trigger control. Her words were measured, unassuming, and yet full of authority. The Marines listened intently, realizing that what she had accomplished was not simply a demonstration of skill, but a lesson they could apply themselves. The entire morning's failures had been transformed into an unforgettable learning experience, anchored by her perfect execution. For the remainder of the session, the energy on the range shifted. Where there had been chaos and frustration, there was now focus, attention, and a quiet drive to learn. Even the Marines who had struggled the most approached their next shots with renewed determination, mentally rehearsing the steps the young woman had demonstrated. Her perfect 100 had not only earned admiration, it had instilled understanding, inspiration, and the recognition that calm focus could overcome panic and frustration. As the session came to an end, the instructor gathered the group. "Today," he said, glancing at the young woman, "you've seen what excellence looks like. Remember this. Learn from it. Let it guide you every time you pick up a rifle." The Marines nodded, some still in disbelief, others thoughtfully reflecting. And the young woman, quiet as always, stepped back from the firing line. The perfect 100 had been achieved, but the impact would resonate far beyond a single shot. The firing range, once filled with tension, frustration, and scattered bullets, now carried a different energy, one of quiet reflection and admiration. The perfect 100 had transformed the morning entirely. The young woman stood at the edge of the line, her rifle lowered, her expression serene, yet her presence remained commanding in its quiet authority. Every Marine, previously consumed by failure, now viewed her not as a peer, but as a masterful example of focus and discipline. They were still processing what they had just witnessed: calm, precise, deliberate, flawless execution. The instructor stepped forward, addressing the group. His tone was firm, but infused with newfound respect. "Today you saw something extraordinary," he said, gesturing toward the young woman. This is more than just marksmanship. This is a lesson in composure, observation, and control. Watch closely, because what she just did, what she just demonstrated, will guide you far beyond today's session. The Marines nodded, some in awe, others in quiet disbelief, struggling to reconcile their morning failures with the display they had just seen. The young woman's eyes swept across the group, landing on each Marine in turn. "Focus on the fundamentals," she said calmly, her voice steady and clear. "Breathing, stance, grip, and alignment, these aren't just technicalities. They determine every shot you take. Every movement, every adjustment, every tiny detail counts." Her words were concise, precise, and devoid of arrogance, yet carried an unmistakable authority. The Marines listened intently, realizing that this was not just advice, it was distilled experience and practical wisdom. One recruit raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, how did you stay so calm? We were all panicking out there." The young woman smiled faintly, a subtle gesture that conveyed both understanding and encouragement. "It's about separating the mental noise from the task at hand," she explained. "Focus on what you can control. The rest, the distractions, the frustration, the pressure, that's outside your control. Don't let it dictate your actions. Breathe, align, execute, one step at a time." Her explanation, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with the Marines. The instructor nodded, adding his own perspective. Most recruits fail because they let the pressure get to them. They focus on the outcome instead of the process. What you just witnessed is a perfect example of executing the process correctly, under pressure. Learn from it. Apply it. This isn't a one-time lesson. It's a principle that will guide you for your entire career. The Marines absorbed his words, some exchanging thoughtful glances, silently acknowledging the wisdom in both the young woman's and instructor's guidance. The young woman continued, moving along the line slowly, observing each Marine's stance and posture. She offered subtle corrections, small adjustments that made a significant difference. "Elbows slightly closer to the body," she said to one. "Don't lean forward. Let the rifle settle naturally," she advised another. Every piece of advice was precise, actionable, and based on the observations she had made that morning. The Marines listened attentively, eager to apply the lessons to their own practice. The tension from earlier had dissipated, replaced by a focused energy that was almost palpable. Some Marines tried to replicate her techniques immediately. They adjusted grips, corrected posture, and concentrated on their breathing. Even small improvements had noticeable effects on accuracy. The instructor watched with satisfaction as the transformation unfolded. "See what just happened?" he asked. "Observation, patience, and focused execution, not force or desperation, change results. That's what you need to take from this session." The young woman's influence was undeniable. She had not only achieved a perfect 100, but had also elevated the skills and understanding of everyone present. One particularly frustrated recruit, who had been struggling all morning, finally managed a near-perfect shot after applying her guidance. He stared at the target in disbelief, then glanced at the young woman. I think I get it now," he said softly. His breakthrough, small as it was, represented the ripple effect of her teaching. The realization struck him. Skill was built through observation, discipline, and calm focus, not through frantic effort or panic-driven corrections. He wasn't alone. Several Marines experienced similar breakthroughs, each silently acknowledging her influence. The instructor addressed the group once more, emphasizing the broader lesson. "What you witnessed isn't just marksmanship," he said firmly. "It's about approach, mindset, and control. Learn to observe carefully, plan your actions, and execute with calm precision. Success is rarely about strength or luck. It's about preparation, focus, and discipline." Keep that in mind every time you handle a weapon, and you'll see improvement faster than you think." His words resonated even more deeply, because the perfect 100 had validated them fully. The young woman paused, observing the Marines as they reflected on their own performance. "Remember," she said softly, yet firmly, "every mistake is a learning opportunity. Don't focus on failure, focus on improvement. Watch carefully, analyze thoroughly, and execute deliberately. That's how you progress, and that's how you gain mastery." Her calm delivery, grounded in experience and skill, left an impression that went far beyond technical instruction. It was a lesson in resilience, patience, and mental discipline qualities every Marine needed to internalize. As the session drew to a close, the atmosphere on the range was transformed. Where there had been frustration and tension, there was now respect, admiration, and determination. The Marines were energized, inspired not just by the perfect 100, but by the quiet confidence and authority the young woman had demonstrated. Her presence had elevated the entire group, teaching lessons in skill, composure, and observation that would resonate long after the rifles were put away. The instructor finally stepped back, looking at the young woman with a mixture of pride and awe. "You didn't just hit a perfect 100, he said quietly, almost to himself. "You taught an entire group of Marines what that really means." She smiled faintly, acknowledging the compliment without arrogance. For her, the lesson had been about more than just hitting a target. It was about transforming the mindset of everyone around her, showing that mastery came from calm focus, preparation, and deliberate execution. The Marines, now reflecting on their own efforts, quietly packed up their equipment, but the energy on the range had shifted. They walked away with more than just the memory of a perfect 100. They carried an understanding of the principles behind it. Observation, patience, and calm focus were now more than abstract concepts. They were demonstrated truths, embodied by someone who had faced the same conditions they had, yet had the composure to conquer them. By the end of the day, every Marine present had internalized the lesson. They discussed their experiences quietly, comparing notes and reflecting on the impact of calm observation versus hurried, panicked attempts. The instructor, usually stern and reserved, walked among them with a rare smile, satisfied that a moment of frustration had been transformed into an unforgettable lesson in mastery and discipline. And through it all, the young woman remained poised and composed, the silent catalyst for a day that would be remembered for years to come. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the firing range. The day that had started with frustration, tension, and repeated failures now carried an entirely different energy. The young woman had achieved the perfect 100, and in doing so, she had transformed the atmosphere among the Marines. Her calm composure, precise skill, and quiet authority had left a lasting impression, one that would resonate far beyond the day's training session. She had not only demonstrated mastery, but had imparted lessons that the Marines would carry with them for years. The instructor, seasoned by decades of experience, surveyed the range with a sense of awe. He had trained countless recruits, watched many attempt to master their skills, and witnessed failures that ranged from minor mistakes to total collapse under pressure. Yet, in all his years, he had never seen anything like this. A quiet, unassuming young woman had turned what could have been a routine, frustrating day into a moment of extraordinary teaching, showing everyone present what true focus, patience, and preparation could achieve. The Marines were still packing their equipment, but the conversation had shifted. Earlier, frustration and complaints had dominated the air. Now, whispers of admiration and reflection replaced them. "Did you see how she aligned her stance?" One Marine asked quietly, still shaken from watching her precision. "And the way she controlled her breathing?" "Incredible," another replied. Even those who had struggled the most that morning nodded in understanding, realizing that her calm focus had illuminated the very essence of marksmanship control over both mind and body. The young woman remained at the edge of the range, observing her fellow Marines. She didn't seek recognition, applause, or accolades. Her focus had been on the rifle, the targets, and the principles she had honed through years of experience. And yet, her impact was undeniable. The instructor approached her once more, this time with a smile that betrayed his admiration and respect. "You didn't just shoot perfectly," he said. "You taught these Marines something they'll never forget. You've set a standard, not just for skill, but for composure and focus. That's a rare gift." She nodded quietly, acknowledging the praise without fanfare. "It's not just about the perfect shot," she said softly. "It's about understanding what you control and what you don't. Each mistake is a lesson, each adjustment a step toward mastery. Focus on the process, not the outcome." Her words resonated deeply, reinforcing the silent lessons she had already imparted through action. The Marines listened, absorbing not only the technical guidance, but also the wisdom behind her approach. As the day drew to a close, the Marines reflected on their own efforts. They discussed what had gone wrong during the morning's initial attempts and how they could apply her lessons in future training. Some attempted to replicate her stance, her breathing, and her alignment, slowly beginning to grasp the power of calm focus. Others committed to observing more carefully, taking notes not just on technique, but on the mental composure required for mastery. The young woman had sparked a quiet revolution among the recruits, inspiring self-reflection and renewed determination. Word of the day's events spread quickly among the base. By the next morning, the story of the perfect 100, the calm, unassuming young woman who had transformed a struggling line of Marines into witnesses of precision and discipline, had become a legend. Recruits spoke of it in hushed tones, instructors referenced it in lessons, and the firing range seemed infused with the memory of her achievement. What had been a single act of skill had become an enduring narrative, a demonstration of excellence that would inspire countless others. The young woman's approach, her calm, deliberate actions, and her flawless execution became a benchmark. Instructors would later reference the day in training sessions, emphasizing the importance of observation, preparation, and mental focus. Recruits who had witnessed the perfect 100 carried the lesson forward, applying it to both marksmanship and broader challenges in their military training. Her influence extended far beyond the targets she had hit. It had reshaped attitudes, expectations, and understanding of what true mastery required. For the young woman herself, the experience was quiet and unassuming. She did not seek recognition, accolades, or status. Her satisfaction came from seeing the transformation in others, from watching Marines begin to grasp the principles she had demonstrated. She had stepped forward when the opportunity arose, and in doing so, had become a catalyst for growth, learning, and inspiration. Her perfect 100 was not only a technical achievement, but a demonstration of the power of focus, patience, and calm under pressure. The instructor, reflecting on the day, realized the broader implications. "It wasn't just about shooting," he said later, speaking to fellow instructors. "It was about mindset, preparation, and observation." That young woman didn't just hit the target. She changed the way these Marines think, how they approach challenges, and how they handle pressure. That's the true lesson. His words would echo in training halls, classrooms, and firing ranges for years, ensuring that the impact of her achievement endured far beyond a single morning. As the sun set, casting golden light over the range, the young woman gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. The Marines watched her go, some silently nodding in respect, others muttering their amazement under their breath. They would not forget the lesson she had imparted, nor the demonstration of skill and composure that had reshaped their understanding of mastery. Her perfect 100 had become more than a score. It was a symbol of what could be achieved through focus, patience, and deliberate practice. Years later, stories of that day would be told again and again. Recruits would recount the tale of the quiet, unassuming young woman who stepped forward, observed the mistakes of others, and achieved the impossible. Instructors would reference it as the epitome of calm focus and mastery under pressure. And every time the story was told, it carried the same lesson. True skill is not measured by strength or speed, but by patience, preparation, and the ability to remain composed when all around you falters. The legend of the perfect 100 endured because it represented more than a technical feat. It represented an ideal, a standard to strive toward, and a demonstration that anyone, with focus and composure, could achieve excellence. The young woman, through a single act of mastery, had inspired an entire generation of Marines, leaving a legacy that extended far beyond the targets on the firing range. She had proven that quiet determination, careful observation, and deliberate execution could create moments of greatness remembered for a lifetime. The day had started with missed shots, frustration, and doubt. It ended with a perfect score, admiration, and inspiration. The young woman had stepped forward when the moment demanded courage, transformed failure into learning, and created a story that would become legend, a story that reminded every Marine that the path to mastery is forged through calm focus, preparation, and unwavering dedication. And so, the firing range fell silent once more. But the story of the perfect 100 lived on, whispered among recruits, respected by instructors, and celebrated as a timeless lesson in skill, patience, and composure. The young woman's legacy was not just in the bullets that struck the bullseye, but in the minds and hearts of every Marine who witnessed her quiet brilliance that day.